Ethan Ward, Liana Ward, Marcus Hale, Detective Claire Benson and Nurse Julia Morgan. 5 lives bound by trust, betrayal, and secrets. In a quiet coastal town in the UK, one man's life was shattered in an instant, leaving a wife free to live a life he never imagined. But when Ethan awoke from a coma, the truths he uncovered were darker than anyone could have predicted, setting a chain of events that would turn love into obsession, and obsession into murder. Please subscribe for daily new update of crime story and watch till end. Ethan Ward lived in a small coastal town in the UK, a place where life moved slowly and people recognized each other by the sound of their footsteps. The narrow streets curved between rows of old stone houses, and the air often carried the scent of sea salt. Ethan enjoyed this quiet world. He believed it kept him steady, safe, and grateful for simple things. Every morning he walked to the repair shop where he worked, passing the same bakery, the same bus stop, the same cracked pavement that had never been fixed. His life was predictable, and he liked it that way. He felt he understood his place in the world. At home, Ethan shared a small but comfortable house with his wife, Liana. Friends described them as ordinary, and neither of them tried to pretend otherwise. Liana spent her days working at a nearby clinic and cared about keeping the home tidy and pleasant. Their neighbors heard no arguments, no strange noises, no signs of trouble. To everyone watching, they were a couple who had mastered calm living. Ethan trusted Liana deeply, almost blindly. He believed loyalty was natural and constant, and he assumed she believed the same. Ethan's routines made him feel grounded. He cooked simple meals, fixed small things around the house, and saved money carefully. On Sundays he washed his car and trimmed the hedge. He admired how Liana often left fresh flowers on the kitchen table and kept everything smelling clean. These gestures convinced him that their marriage was peaceful, even warm. He never imagined that anything could disturb the life they built, let alone break it apart. Yet beneath the surface, small signs existed, quiet ones. Ethan never noticed. Liana sometimes returned home later than usual, explaining that work was demanding. She appeared distracted on certain evenings, glancing at her phone a little too often. Ethan, trusting by nature, never questioned these changes. He simply accepted them as part of adult life. He believed relationships had phases, and not all days could feel the same. Instead of worrying, he focused on his job, saving up for future plans he hoped to share with her. The town around them remained peaceful, unaware of any hidden tension. The postman continued his daily rounds. Families walked along the shore on weekends. Teenagers gathered near the old lighthouse. Everything looked stable, as if nothing in the world could shift dramatically. Ethan lived inside this calm rhythm, never sensing that a storm was forming just beyond his reach. To him, life felt like a straight road with no sharp turns. He had no reason to think anything dark was approaching. He believed he was building a future with a partner who cared for him. In his mind, Liana stood with him, steady and loyal. He expected tomorrow to be much like yesterday, filled with familiar tasks and predictable moments. But hidden beneath this quiet world, threads of betrayal were already taking shape, waiting for the right moment to unravel everything he thought he knew. One rainy night, Ethan finished a long shift at the repair shop. The weather had turned harsh without warning. Heavy clouds hung low and a sharp wind swept across the roads. He hesitated before starting the drive home, feeling an unusual fatigue in his bones. Still, he wanted to return to Liana, imagining a warm meal and the comfort of familiar walls. Rain hammered against the roof of his car as he pulled out of the parking lot, each drop echoing like a warning he didn't notice. The narrow road leading out of town was known for being difficult during storms. Water gathered quickly in uneven patches, forming shallow pools that made tires lose grip. Streetlights flickered through the heavy rainfall, creating distorted reflections on the ground. Ethan held the steering wheel firmly, leaning forward to see through the blurred windshield. He turned on the wipers, but the rain fell so thickly that everything beyond his headlights looked like moving shadows. He drove slowly, concentrating on keeping control. As he approached a long bend, the wind grew stronger. Trees swayed violently on both sides of the road. He spotted the faint outline of a large vehicle approaching from the opposite direction. It was a lorry, moving faster than seemed safe under those conditions. Ethan felt a sudden uneasiness, a momentary instinct telling him to slow even more, and he followed it. The road was slick, and the sound of rushing water mixed with the roar of the lorry's engine. The moment happened too fast for him to fully understand. The lorry drifted slightly across the center line, its tires failing to hold their path against the wind and water. Ethan tried to steer away, but the road offered no grip. His car swerved violently as the lorry's headlights expanded in front of him like two blazing suns. The collision struck with a force that tore through metal and glass. His body jerked forward, and the world exploded in sound and pain. The vehicle spun off the road, crashing into a deep grassy ditch. The impact crushed the front of the car and left the interior filled with the smell of oil, smoke, and wet earth. Rain poured in through the shattered window. Ethan's thoughts blurred. His body felt heavy, disconnected from his mind. Emergency crews arrived after a passerby reported the crash. They worked quickly, cutting through twisted metal to reach him. His pulse was weak, and his breathing was shallow. At the hospital, doctors identified severe head trauma. They stabilized him, but his brain had suffered too much shock. By the next morning, Ethan slipped into a deep coma. Machines breathed for him. Tubes fed him. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, as he remained silent and unmoving. His world froze in that dark moment while the world outside kept moving. Liana, family, neighbors, everyone continued their lives while Ethan lay trapped in stillness, unaware of the storm waiting for him when he woke again. With Ethan lying silent in a hospital bed, life outside continued in ways he could never have predicted. At first, Liana visited regularly. She brought flowers, spoke with nurses, and pretended to be a devoted wife waiting for her husband to recover. People felt sympathy for her, believing she carried a heavy burden. She accepted their support with the practiced expressions of someone who understood tragedy. But as time passed, her visits became less frequent. Weeks slipped by, and the pattern grew clearer to those who watched closely. Neighbors who once saw her rushing to the hospital began noticing small changes in her behavior. She returned home later, often wearing new clothes and carrying bags she had not taken with her earlier. She seemed distracted, almost detached from her husband's condition. When someone asked about Ethan, she offered brief explanations, describing him as stable but unchanged. Her eyes no longer showed worry, only impatience. It became obvious she was adjusting to a life where he was absent, as though she had already accepted his fate. Then unfamiliar vehicles began appearing outside their home. At first it was a single motorbike parked discreetly near the gate. Later, it became a dark car that visited in the evenings, staying for hours. Neighbors noticed the pattern and whispered among themselves. They wondered whether Liana was receiving comfort from someone new or simply hosting a friend. But the visits continued, often late into the night. Curtains remained drawn, and lights flickered behind the windows until early morning. People talked, but no one confronted her directly. Financial matters also shifted quietly. Ethan's coworkers needed certain documents and attempted to reach Liana, but she avoided their calls. One day, a bank notification caught the attention of someone close to Ethan. Money had been withdrawn from a joint account, large amounts over short periods. No one believed Ethan would approve such transactions, especially given his careful nature. It became clear she was handling finances recklessly, draining savings that Ethan had worked years to build. Inside the house, things changed too. She sold many of Ethan's belongings, claiming she needed space or money for hospital expenses. Tools he cherished, furniture he had restored himself, and even personal items disappeared one by one. She discarded photographs and removed decorations Ethan had made, slowly erasing his presence. It was as though she was preparing the home for someone else, reshaping it to fit a life he was no longer part of. Her behavior grew bolder as months passed. She stopped checking Ethan's medical updates regularly. Nurses noticed she had not visited for long stretches, often missing important meetings with doctors. Even when she did show up, she seemed restless, eager to leave. Staff questioned her commitment privately, but they had no authority to intervene further. Behind all these changes, a quiet truth formed. Liana was living as though Ethan would never return, and perhaps as though she hoped he wouldn't. Around her, the town sensed something was wrong, but no one could predict how deeply the secrets would eventually cut. While Ethan lay motionless, unseen choices were shaping a future he would never have imagined, preparing the ground for a betrayal that would ignite a darkness in him when he finally opened his eyes. After nearly a year of deep stillness, Ethan's body began showing faint signs of awakening. It started with small twitches in his fingers that nurses almost missed. His eyelids moved slightly during routine checks, although no one knew whether it was intentional or a random reflex. Machines continued their steady rhythm beside him, filling the room with a repeating pattern of soft beeps. Doctors monitored these changes cautiously, unsure if his brain would ever return to full function. Yet something inside him was slowly fighting its way back to the surface. One morning, before sunrise, Ethan's right hand shifted more deliberately than before. A nurse checking his vitals noticed the movement and leaned closer. His eyes fluttered open for the first time in months, revealing a foggy, distant gaze. The world around him was blurred and unfamiliar. His chest rose sharply, as his body remembered how to breathe without assistance. The nurse alerted the medical team, and within minutes, the room filled with professionals assessing every sign of consciousness. The news reached the staff quickly. Ethan Ward was waking up. His recovery was slow and painful. Days passed before he could turn his head without dizziness. Muscles that had remained unused for months resisted every attempt to move them. Nurses supported him through physiotherapy sessions, where even lifting an arm felt like climbing a mountain. His mind, though awake, felt cluttered and heavy. Memories appeared in fragments, drifting like pieces of broken glass he had to assemble carefully. But the more time he spent awake, the clearer his thoughts became. What troubled him most was the silence from the outside world. He expected to see familiar faces, Liana, neighbors, co-workers. But no one came. Nurses spoke softly around him, hinting at the absence without saying too much. Their exchanged looks told a story he could not yet interpret. He sensed that something was wrong, something hidden behind the calm voices and professional smiles. Each passing day without a visit deepened his unease. As his hearing sharpened, he began noticing conversations occurring just outside his room. Nurses whispered about how long it had been since his wife last checked on him. One mentioned seeing her with someone else, and another commented on financial troubles involving Ethan's accounts. They did not intend for him to hear, but their words slipped through the cracked door and settled into his mind like heavy stones. The image of Liana being unfaithful, indifferent, or even relieved by his condition formed slowly but firmly. A nurse eventually brought him some personal belongings, hoping they might help stimulate memory. Among them was his phone, discharged and dusty. After charging it, Ethan browsed through missed calls and messages. Some notifications from banks hinted at large transactions he didn't authorize. Social media showed subtle changes. Photos of him had been removed or archived. His absence had not only been accepted, it had been erased. With every new detail he discovered, the betrayal grew clearer. This realization sparked something cold inside him. It wasn't loud anger or sudden shock. It was a quiet transformation, a shift from confusion to determination. Ethan understood that the life he believed he still had was gone, replaced by a version he never imagined. His mind, though weakened, began forming a direction. He knew he needed to the hospital as soon as he could walk again. He needed answers, and deep inside, a darker purpose was beginning to take shape. Once Ethan was strong enough to leave the hospital, he returned home quietly, traveling without informing Liana or anyone else. The journey felt unreal to him. Every mile brought a mix of hope and dread, as though he were approaching a place that no longer belonged to him. When the taxi finally turned onto his street, he stared out the window at the familiar houses lined under the gray sky. Nothing looked different from the outside, yet something inside him sensed that everything was already changed. When he stepped through the front gate, he noticed details that unsettled him immediately. The garden he once cared for with careful attention had become overgrown, with weeds choking the flower beds. The hedge he trimmed every Sunday was uneven and wild. Even the welcome mat he bought years ago had been replaced with a newer one, as if the old piece of their shared life had been discarded. He paused at the door, trying to prepare himself. But he knew nothing could soften whatever he was about to find. Inside the house, the changes were sharper and more painful. The walls had new artwork, bold, modern pieces that did not reflect Ethan's simple taste. Furniture had been rearranged, and some items he treasured were missing entirely. A favorite lamp he had repaired, a handmade shelf, and even his old books were gone. In their place were decorations he had never seen before. The home no longer felt like a shared space. It felt like someone else's territory. As he walked deeper into the living room, he found more evidence confirming the rumors he overheard in the hospital. A jacket he didn't recognize hung casually over a chair. A pair of men's boots sat near the door. On the coffee table were 2 empty wine glasses, recently used. The smell in the house was different too. Someone else's cologne lingered faintly in the air. These small details struck him harder than any crash or injury he had endured. Each one cut through him with silent precision. He moved toward the bedroom, hoping it would offer clarity. Instead, it delivered a devastating truth. His personal drawer had been emptied, replaced with clothing that did not belong to him. A photo that once sat on the bedside table, one of him and Liana during a holiday, was gone, leaving a pale mark where it had been. In its place sat a new frame with no picture inside, as if waiting for a new memory to take its place. The room felt sterile, unfamiliar, and intentionally cleared of him. The betrayal settled into him slowly, like ice spreading through his veins. It wasn't just the presence of another man, it was the deliberate removal of his existence. Liana had not simply moved on. She had built a life without him, intentionally replacing every trace he once left behind. Standing in the center of the room, Ethan felt the weight of everything that had happened. The coma, the silence, the rumors, the emptiness of his home. The pain was sharp, but beneath it, something darker began forming. It was not explosive anger but a cold, controlled certainty. He realized he was no longer the man who left this house a year ago. That man had died in the crash. The version of him standing here now was shaped by loss, betrayal, months of silent suffering. The more he absorbed the truth, the clearer his thoughts became. He understood now that Liana had made her hers long before he awakened. And in that moment, Ethan began forming his own decision, one that would change everything forever. Ethan moved with a new kind of quietness, a controlled stillness that had grown inside him during the long empty months of his coma. Every step he took through the house deepened his understanding of how completely Liana had erased him. But instead of breaking down or confronting anyone immediately, he slipped into a mode of observation. He felt as if he were standing outside himself, watching a different man take control, someone calmer, sharper, and colder than before. This version of Ethan processed each detail with precision, storing information the way a hunter memorizes the habits of its prey. He began by studying the routines unfolding around the house. Over the next few days, Ethan kept himself hidden, staying mostly in the unused guest room or slipping out early, before sunlight touched the windows. He avoided creating noise, avoiding anything that might reveal his presence. Liana assumed he was still in the hospital, unaware he had returned to witness the life she built without him. Ethan used this advantage carefully, observing her movements and the changes in her behavior. He noticed she left the house at the same time each morning, dressed neatly and carrying a bag with unfamiliar items. Sometimes she returned for lunch, sometimes not. More often she came back in the late afternoon only to leave again shortly after, her expression calm and oddly satisfied. Ethan studied her face from the shadows of the hallway, watching emotions he had never seen before. She looked carefree, unburdened, as if she were finally living the life she always wanted. But she was not alone. The man who visited often appeared relaxed and confident, moving around the house like he belonged there. He picked up Ethan's old mugs, used Ethan's old kitchen tools, even sat in Ethan's favorite chair. Ethan watched them from behind, barely opened doors, learning their schedule. The man arrived at predictable times, usually after dusk. He stayed for hours, and sometimes the two left together. Ethan tracked the sound of their footsteps, the rhythm of their laughter, and the way they moved through the home as if Ethan had never existed. When Liana slept, Ethan quietly explored the spaces she tried to hide. In the wardrobe, he found drawers filled with new jewelry, watches and clothes he never saw her wear during their marriage. In a locked box beneath the bed, he discovered financial documents, bank statements showing large withdrawals, transfers to unknown accounts, and credit card purchases that made the betrayal even more blatant. She had been emptying their shared savings long before he woke up, preparing a separate life without any room for him. Ethan did not react impulsively. He learned from the slow, patient silence of his coma how to move without letting emotions take control. He spent evenings sitting alone in the darkened guest room, piecing together every detail he gathered. He built a timeline in his mind: the nights she didn't visit the hospital, the financial patterns, the presence of the new man, the deliberate removal of Ethan's belongings. Each fact settled into a larger picture that made the truth undeniable. As he watched their routines repeat night after night, Ethan began planning, not in a frantic rush, but with chilling precision. He noted when the house was empty, when the man left, and when Liana was most distracted. He memorized which doors made noise, which floorboards creaked, and how the lights reflected through the windows at different hours. Every observation strengthened the dark purpose forming inside him. He no longer sought answers, he wanted resolution. By the end of the week, Ethan knew every weakness in their schedule. He knew when Liana would be alone. He knew when the house would be silent, and most importantly, he knew when his moment would come. His mind had already crossed a line he could not reverse. The betrayal had evolved into a plan, and the plan was evolving into something irreversible. The quiet man who once trimmed hedges and repaired lamps had disappeared completely. In his place stood someone who believed justice had only one path left. A heavy storm rolled in as evening approached, coating the sky in layers of dark clouds that moved like restless waves. Wind rattled loose branches against rooftops, and distant thunder rolled across the town as if warning the streets below that something irreversible was about to unfold. Ethan watched the storm from the guest room window, studying the way the rain began to fall in sheets. The weather gave him cover, loud enough to mask footsteps, dark enough to hide movement. For the first time since he returned home, he felt the moment settle clearly before him. Everything in his plan aligned with the chaos outside. He waited until the house grew still. The man who regularly visited had left earlier, leaving Liana alone for the night. Ethan listened carefully to the sounds inside the house: the faint hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of the old wooden walls, and the steady tap of rain on the windows helped him track her movements. She walked from room to room, unaware of the eyes watching her from the shadows. Ethan sat quietly, controlling his breathing, allowing his mind to sharpen until it felt detached from everything human. When the clock reached a time he had identified as her most distracted hour, when she made tea, checked her phone, and wandered into the living room, Ethan moved. His steps were deliberate, guided by the knowledge of which floorboards were silent. He slipped through the hallway like a ghost returning to reclaim a space that had been stolen from him. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the corridor, but the thunder drowned out every soft sound he made. Liana stood in the living room, her back turned, completely unaware of the presence behind her. The small lamp on the side table cast a warm glow across the room, offering a brief glimpse of the life she had built in Ethan's absence. New cushions, new decorations, new photographs, traces of a future that didn't include him. For Ethan, The sight solidified the coldness that had been growing inside him since the day he woke up in the hospital. The room felt smaller as he approached, filled with the tension of everything left unspoken between them. The storm outside intensified, as if mirroring the breaking point he had reached. He stepped closer, moving with the kind of calm that only forms when a person believes they have nothing left to lose. The world around him narrowed to a single point, the woman who had erased him long before he returned. What happened next unfolded without hesitation. It was not driven by sudden rage, but by a deep, controlled certainty formed over days of silent observation. Years of trust, months of abandonment, and the fresh cut of betrayal collided in one irreversible action. The storm swallowed the noise, covering any trace of struggle. Within moments, the house fell into a silence so absolute it felt unnatural. As the rain continued to pound the windows, Ethan stood motionless, staring at what remained of the life he once believed was safe. He felt no triumph, only an empty numbness spreading through him. The man who entered the room was not the same man who had lived in this house before the accident. Something inside him had collapsed beyond repair. He left the scene calmly, almost mechanically, walking through the house one last time. The thunder outside rolled like distant drums. He knew the storm would eventually pass, but nothing in his world ever would again. The next morning arrived with a dim gray light settling over the town, washing everything in a colorless calm that felt strangely detached from the storm that had raged only hours earlier. The rain had stopped, leaving puddles scattered across the pavement, and droplets clinging to windows like frozen tears. Birds perched silently on rooftops, unsettled by the sudden shift from chaos to stillness. In the center of this quiet morning, Ethan sat on the front step of his house, motionless, staring ahead as if he were waiting for something inevitable. His clothes were damp, his expression blank, and there was no sign of panic in his eyes, only an eerie calm that made the scene even more unsettling. The neighbors noticed him long before the police arrived. Some watched from behind curtains, whispering among themselves. They had grown suspicious in recent months, and sensed that something final had occurred, but none dared approach him. They stood frozen in their homes, unsure whether the man sitting so still was recovering from grief or preparing for something darker. A few remembered seeing another man visit Liana repeatedly, and those same people now exchanged fearful looks, wondering whether everything they suspected had finally spiraled into tragedy. The first police car stopped quietly near the front gate. Officers stepped out cautiously, assessing the scene with the practiced calm of people who had walked into uncertainty too many times before. One approached Ethan slowly, calling out to him, but he did not respond. His gaze remained fixed ahead, unblinking. He offered no explanation, no resistance, no attempt to leave. The officers advanced into the house, moving methodically, and within minutes the truth revealed itself. The silence inside showed exactly what had taken place during the storm. When the officers returned to the front steps, Ethan did not attempt to flee or deny anything. He simply stood up when instructed, his movements slow and detached, as if he were following steps he had already rehearsed in his mind. The neighbors watched as he was placed into the back of the police car. Not once did he turn his head to look at the house. Not once did he show fear or regret. It was as though some part of him had left long before the officers arrived. At the station, investigators sifted through the details of his disappearance, the changes in Liana's life, and the evidence found in the home. Ethan's medical history, his traumatic brain injury, his long coma, and the psychological strain of betrayal became key points during interviews and court proceedings. His lawyers argued that he was not the same person who existed before the accident, that his mental state had fractured under the weight of months of abandonment and emotional devastation. But the law required a clearer boundary between pain and responsibility, and the severity of his actions could not be softened by sympathy. The trial drew attention from across the region. People were divided. Some felt pity for a man who had woken to a life destroyed, while others saw only the irreversible choice he made on the night of the storm. In the end, the court delivered a life sentence. Ethan accepted it without reaction. He did not ask for mercy, nor did he protest the verdict. He simply listened, expressionless, as if the decision had already been made in his own mind long before the judge spoke. Back in the quiet coastal town, people continued their routines. But the story lingered in whispers. The once peaceful street now carried a dark memory. A reminder that betrayal can twist a wounded mind into dangerous shapes, and that even the calmest lives can crumble into tragedy with terrifying speed. Ethan's empty home stood as a silent monument to everything that had gone wrong, a lesson carved into the quiet town forever.